welcome back to the Donkey Rate podcast. Thank you on the support on the last podcast episode. We have Dylan Wight today, the member of Tarneit. Could you tell us a bit about yourself for the audience who may or may not know you?
Yep. Yeah, no worries. So, as Tobias said, I'm the state member for Tarneit, Dylan Wight. I was elected at the 2022 Victorian state election. That was the first time I was elected in the first election that I ran in, so I was quite lucky. I was, or I am, one of the sort of younger members of state parliament. I think there's probably four or five maybe that might be younger than me. I've just turned 34 years old. I was 32 years old when I was elected. Prior to being in Parliament, obviously I'm sorry, I'm a Labor member of Parliament. I'm a member of the Labor Party and the Labor Caucus. Prior to being a member of Parliament, I was a union official with the AMWU. So I did that for 10 years. I came into the AMWU in about 2013, 14, just around the time that the car industry was announcing that it was closing in Victoria, both in Melbourne and Geelong. So I worked a lot with those members on what we called a transition project. So it was making sure that all of our members in the vehicle industry, I think there was about 5,000 of them across Victoria, had further employment to go into if they wished to, if they weren't retiring. So worked, across a whole group of stakeholders, industry, government, and obviously with our members as well. A lot of our members, funnily enough, I'm from Geelong originally. A lot of our members at that time, funnily enough, given the locality of the Toyota plant, which was the largest manufacturer at the time, a lot of our members lived in Hoppers Crossing and Tarneit. So when there was a couple of vacancies out in the western suburbs, and Tarneit was one of them, and some conversations were had with me around running for pre-selection. It was something that I was really comfortable doing. I'd spent a lot of time in that community. I'd spent a lot of time in people's homes, our members' homes with their families. Like I said, making sure that they had an employment future after the car industry closed. So I guess that's sort of a scratches the surface, I guess, of my background and sort of how I got into politics.
Yeah.
Just to touch on that, my father's actually a member of the AMWU, so
Yeah.
so
What
there's
does
a
he
bit of
do?
connection there.
Yeah.
He works in the meat industry.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Cool.
at JBS.
Yep. Yeah. Righto.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I absolutely loved my time at the AMWU. I went sort of back to university a little bit later in my life at 23, and I was really, really lucky to get a job as soon as I finished university with the AMWU and working in the union movement. As I progressed through university and you sort of figure out exactly what you want to do, I really wanted to work in the union movement, and I was really lucky to be able to get that opportunity really quickly. Obviously, a lot of people in the union movement, organisers and officials, haven't been to university. They come from a trade background. So I was sort of unique in that respect. From the AMWU, I think I was probably the only organiser with a university degree. So I was really lucky to get that opportunity, and it taught me a lot. There's lots of different things that you can do in the labour movement. And I always give the advice for any young person that has the opportunity to do so, representing and organising and speaking to workers is a really, really good thing to do, because once you progress through your career, perhaps you end up in Parliament, perhaps you don't, but it gives you a really good understanding of what blue collar and middle class workers go through on a daily basis, and I think in some respect probably gives you some empathy. When things go wrong, you look at things on the news, you look at disputes, and it's really easy to be selfish and think of yourself. Like there's a dispute on the waterfront. So I didn't get my package. I got my package 5 days late. I think it really teaches you some empathy around that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Shall we get into the first question, which I have? Um, how is your how was your high school and university life? And do you have any memorable moments?
Um, oh look, I was a pretty subpar high school student. Um, was far more concerned as a teenager with playing sport and socializing than I was with studying. Um, I never found, like, to be honest, I never found high school overly difficult. Like, it it wasn't a lack of academic capacity. It was just a lack of um, I guess it was probably I had my priorities wrong at the time. Um, so from an academic perspective, there's probably not too many highlights from my high school. But I did thoroughly enjoy it. I went to two high schools. I went to Geelong High and I went to Newcombe Secondary College, both in Geelong. Um, Newcombe Secondary College is a high school that is in a incredibly low socioeconomic area, and as was my primary school. So and if you look at my first speech, I mentioned it. I grew up with a lot of kids from public housing, and a lot of kids from really low socioeconomic households, which has, to some degree, I think, really shaped sort of my values that I have now. If it wasn't for compassionate governments, if it's not for Medicare, if it wasn't for Medicare, public housing, social welfare, those families, they would have been homeless, and they wouldn't have been able to access, medical care, etc. And those families, I played football with those kids. I played cricket with those kids at the sort of local club, and they made up a serious part of the fabric of the community that I grew up in. So I mean, that's something that I guess I look back on from my schooling. University, like I said, I went back to university at 23 years old. 23. Had my first child at 24, and worked full time at the same time. So I guess I'm kind of proud of that. I worked full time, was raising a family, and doing university full time as well. And I'm not, unique in that. A lot of people do that. But at university, I graduated with distinction, which was something that I was really proud of, and something I guess I attribute to just at 23, 24, 25 years old, just being that little bit more mature, having that little bit more life experience, because I certainly wouldn't have got those marks as an 18 or 19-year-old.
That's pretty interesting there as well. So what did you actually study at university?
Yeah, the classic arts degree, the classic Deakin arts degree, and double majored in politics and politics and policy studies, I think it was called, and journalism. I actually went back to university to be a sports journalist. I was going to write about
Oh,
football. Yeah, I was going to write about football. And you needed two majors, and then you could have a sub major as well, which I sub-majored in media and comms. And what I learnt in media and comms in 2013, 14 is probably absolutely and completely redundant now, I would think. As as you guys know, you're doing a podcast, but most media now is social media. Um, so yeah, so I went back to be a sports journalist, and just I think as I progressed through university, I think the political side of it probably took over.
So you always thought you'd go down that political path, while even before you joined the union movement, you always thought you'd be into politics.
Well, I was always into politics. I come from a um, like my father was sort of involved in politics, at a certain level. He was a candidate in '96, got beaten, but was and his dad was the same, but was quite politically astute and quite politically engaged, and was dad's a teacher, so obviously was somebody that really valued education. So spoke to us a lot about current affair issues, etc. When we're at home. You know, watch the 7:30 report. I would have thought, we 10,000 times by the time I turned 18. Not because I wanted to, but because that's what was on TV. So yeah, I wouldn't. I mean, back to the question, like, did I know that I was going to go into politics? Like, I once I sort of got to that point where I was like, I want to work for a union. But yeah, no, I never necessarily thought that I was going to end up as a politician. I was, pretty sure by the age of sort of 24 that I was going to work somewhere in the movement. And there's lots of different occupations you can do in the movement. But no, certainly didn't know or think that I would be a politician until far later on.
Pretty interesting, yeah. So we'll move on to our second question. So, as you did touch on before, you were a representative of the AMWU, so the Australian Manufacturing Union, before entering state parliament. How did being a representative within your union help you in your own political career?
So I started with the AMW, as I said, as part of the vehicle division. One of the former secretaries of the vehicle division is now a minister in the state parliament, and we're quite close. So
Who's that?
It's Minister Tierney, Gail Tierney.
Oh, okay.
So we're all quite close, but I guess sort of as I progressed and the vehicle division become no more, and it's just the AMWU now. There's no divisions. I started doing all of the sort of party political work for the union. So the way we do it in the Labor Party, it's essentially made up 50% of unions, 50% sort of rank and file members. The AMWU is quite a large union, so it has a fair bit of clout within the party. I started doing all their political work, and then from there become the convener of all of the left unions in the party, and did that at quite a young age. I think it might have been 28 or something like that. And then from there, you sort of, I mean, not to go too deep into our factional workings, but you sort of have a seat at the table, I guess, and you're around when negotiations happen, and you gain the respect of your sort of fellow people in the party, and I sort of think once you get respect, once you've got that respect, and you sort of prove yourself as a as somebody who's good at their job, when you sort of put your hand up, it makes it a little bit easier, I guess. But yeah, I mean, people get pre-selected in many different ways. I got pre-selected in an environment where we were still in administration. So there was no local votes. I don't know if you guys know about that or not, but the branch was in administration. So we were sort of in a situation where we were really just negotiating people that we thought were good people, and thought had connection to areas, and thought were going to be really good candidates. And the national executive was sort of ticking it off. So that's the environment that I got pre-selected in as well, which is probably a little bit different to most.
Yeah, because when were you pre-selected again? It was a couple of years back, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think I got pre-selected in December 2021. So we pre-selected, about 11 months out from the election, or 11 and a half. So basically just before Christmas 2021, I was pre-selected, and I was lucky enough that I was pre-selected on a post, so I was the only person that nominated for Tarneit, and the national executive ticked it off.
Yeah. Well, now, yeah. So, I guess in that sense, the Labour Party in general, I think it's as you said before, it's very, very union based, and there is a lot of, I guess, factional things involved, like a certain union might take a certain electorate and that sort of thing. Do you think that's really the case, or?
No, so we don't. It's not so much that a union will take a certain electorate. It's that a faction will potentially have a certain electorate. So it's sort of obviously split up between the left and the right, and we try and do it proportionally. But I think it's too simplistic to say that like a certain faction or a certain union or whatever has an electorate. Like there are still local members who were not in administration anymore, so they get a vote, right? So pre-selections occur, and whoever's going to run needs to get the support of local members in their electorate. But not just that, and I think we do a very good job of this. And I think we do a far better job of this than what the Liberal Party do, which is why we get the results that we do compared to them. Is the main overarching consideration for us is that the candidate's a good candidate, because no one gives a when you go to the ballot box, no one gives a stuff what faction you're in. They want you to be a good, competent candidate that's going to represent their interests throughout the next term. So that's the main consideration every time we go through a pre-selection, to be frank.
And you're, of course, demographics of electorates change, of course. So it can,
Yep.
In a sense, one faction may have more control at a certain point, but in different time, another faction could have more control. So it does really change often.
Well, we have a redistribution in Victoria every 8 years.
Yeah,
frankly,
as well.
Frankly, I don't think that's enough, right? Like, my
Exactly.
state of
I think, I think
Yeah.
also because especially the West is just booming. So, eventually within 8 years, because we had our redistribution 2 years ago, I feel like,
Yep.
They probably should have one every single election because demographics change all the time.
It should just be, I think Electoral Matters will probably come back and report on this, and I'm not quite sure what they'll report, so I probably shouldn't say too much on it. But I think the federal system is really what works, right? Like the population tells you when you have a redistribution, and that might be every election, it might not. But I'm going to be in a situation where I'm going to be representing close to 2 state electorates by the next election, because we haven't had a redistribution. And with the finite resources that you get in a backbencher's office, which is 2.5 staff, it's very, very hard to service 80,000 electors. Like, very hard.
Yeah, I can imagine because Tarneit, that whole area is expanding so far westward, and
Yeah.
2.5 EOs, as you said, is just not enough to service 80,000 people.
Yeah.
And
No, it's not.
and it's a very multicultural community as well, as you said before. So,
Yes.
their needs are probably a lot, I don't want to say a lot greater than, some other electorate needs. So it is pretty disappointing that you can't have a redistribution every single election
Yeah.
that can. For you, Dylan, I'm just saying this for you as well. Like, it can be pretty hard as a representative if you're representing basically 2 electorates in science.
Yeah, and I won't be the only one. I won't be the only one. There's electorates in the north, in the outer north, that are doing the same thing. I don't know that my electorate's needs are greater. Just at times they're different. There are a lot of electorates with people sort of in great need. When you're representing a multicultural community, just sometimes the needs are just slightly different. And the way you communicate and the way you reach those communities is slightly different as well.
Yeah, all right then. We'll move on to our next question. George.
What are your main priorities for the people of Tarneit in the next 3 years?
Yeah, so this term?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we went to the election and with the promise to build a new train station in Tarneit West. So transport infrastructure is probably the thing that comes up most with me, like it does in any growing suburbs. We some of the planning that's been done at certain times, I don't think has been fantastic, and then trying to retrofit infrastructure into poor planning is something that's incredibly difficult. But we went to the last election with a promise to build a new train station. So Tarneit has an existing train station. It's the busiest train station, B-line train station, outside of Southern Cross. And there are 2 more train stations, I think, proposed in the Western Rail Plan. And we have now funded through the budget and committed to build the station at Tarneit West, which is on the corner of Davis and Leeks Road. So consultation on that station will begin early this year. So the community will have a say in what their station looks like and what the functionality of it is. And then we anticipate to have that station finished by 2026. So that's the main priority. What we're also doing, and what I think, frankly, we've been really, really good at in the West and in Tarneit in particular is education infrastructure. So I opened 2 brand new schools at the start of this year, last year, and I will open 2 brand new schools on January 31, and I will open a brand new school next year as well. I think it'll end up something like 8 schools in 3 or 4 years or something like that, which is significant for a growing area, and it's a really young population too. Yeah, people having families in Tarneit. I think something like 120 babies are born each week at the Werribee Mercy Hospital, which scares the living Christ out of me just to think how big this area is going to be in 15 or 20 years. So education infrastructure, but not just. And my electorate is sort of, I almost see it split in 2. Got Hoppers Crossing, which is been there for a long time. It's an existing sort of subdivision, and then you've got Tarneit, which is quite new and growing really fast. So, and the needs are quite different between the 2 communities. So new schools in Tarneit are incredibly important, but then upgrading schools in Hoppers Crossing is really important as well. And there's a couple there that I do need to get upgraded in the next 2 or 3 years because they've been there since like 1980 and haven't had a lot of work done. So those, those education priorities and that train station are sort of front of mind for me. We'll continue to upgrade community sporting clubs. Community sporting infrastructure, when a subdivision is done, the developer sort of whacks a footy over there and posts and says, yeah, cheers, there you go. And then it's up to us and council to build club rooms and upgrade lights and build scoreboards and do all those sorts of things. We'll continue to do that over the next 2 or 3 years. We've been really good at that in the past. And we are about to upgrade some lights on Goddard Reserve in Tarneit, as well as put an electronic scoreboard on Wooden Road Reserve. And we'll continue to do those things. And then, at some point towards the back end of the term, we've probably got to start looking at roads. And I'll be a really big advocate for that. They're incredibly expensive. We did the Western Roads upgrade in 2000, and I think it might have been 19. That was $1.8 billion. If that was $1.8 billion in 2019, it's $5 billion now. So those investments are significant, but they're important. So the duplication of Sayers Road will be one that I'll go really hard on and I hope can get done or funded towards the back end of the term.
Yeah, I think George you were going to say something about because I know me and George can talk this a bit more, but I know some people living in the Tarneit area,
Yep.
and the Tarneit station, I believe on the other side of the Tarneit station, there's like no infrastructure, really, like no buses for people to move to the station, so it's very hard for them to get to the station and go to the city via V Line because there's no buses, and I think there's like a rideshare bus app or something like that.
Yeah, so I can give you some history on it if you want it.
Yeah, that'd be great
so
actually. I don't know all the details of the issue, but I've heard about it a bit.
yeah, so I mean the area that you're talking about is Tarneit North, and so the Liberal Party have been in power 4 years out of the last, Jesus, what are we talking? 2019, I don't know, long time,
Probably
28.
4 of the last 14.
Well, we can go with that, but then we're in government a long time before then. So during that time, and I've spoken to this a bit, they did nothing in Tarneit. No new school, no school upgrade, no significant school upgrade, no infrastructure, nothing. The one legacy that the Liberal Party have in Tarneit, and it's a Matthew Guy legacy from when he was planning minister, is they did the PSP, they did planning permit for Tarneit North, which is the estate that you're talking about. So as a result of that planning, which was absolutely horrendous, we have an estate that we can't put a bus route through because the roads are too skinny. So a conventional bus can't get through it. So we are now having to retrofit options like Flexi Ride, which is the ride share that you speak of, for residents to be able to get around. Like it's incredibly poor. It's horrendous. Just so, you know, a PSP done just so a developer can get an extra 150 houses in there and make some more money at the expense of people's living standards. You know, it's the sort of stuff that we just can't let happen again, because trying to retrofit infrastructure into that is not just near on impossible, it's obscenely expensive. So we have the Flexi Ride option at the moment, and my office is working with the department to try and figure out what other options we can come up with, so people in that area can have, you know, access to quality public transport, which they deserve.
Yes, because I know in a lot of those, you know, in a lot of our outer western regions, a lot of them are pretty tightly squeezed. I think I've been around Williams Landing a little bit, and some of the roads there are just they're so tight, and you can hardly squeeze through if there's parked cars there. So I do understand that issue that, you know, buses can't freely move through those roads there. So it is a really big issue, and I understand that, you know, it is very hard for buses. So in that case, you know, you can't really put a lot of great public transport in that sort of area just due to the planning issues that you did speak of. So I think the Flexi bus ride option probably sadly might be the best option that we have for that area.
It's something that's been really popular from what I can tell, but also something that's been like used significantly, like a lot. Yeah.
Do you know how often it goes around the whole of Tarneit North? Do you have any idea of how
Well,
often it goes?
it's not a route, so it's like you said, it's an on-demand service.
So it's basically like you call it, like it's basically like an Uber ride share sort of thing. Like you text, you have an app and then you ask when you want it, like a specific time, and it'll come to your house, then pick you up and go.
It'll get you at the end of your street. Yep.
Ah, okay. And yeah, so I guess in that sense, it's probably a good option for those people out there. But maybe, do you know how many run at one time in the whole Tarneit North? Is it one or two, or?
I don't know. I feel like there's probably two running, at each time. I mean, fixed bus routes are what you want, but in a situation where that's not possible, you have to come up with creative options. So we've done this. I think there's a Flexi Ride service in Melton, and I think there might be one in Woodend as well.
I know there's one in Thornhill Park because my family has an investment property there, and there's no bus infrastructure, nothing there. So they have a Flexi bus ride service there. So, but it's a lot of people don't really like it too much because it's very, very in a sense it's not very immediate. Like it's not the same as like an actual bus service, and it's not the size of a bus service. So, you know, the buses could fill up very, very quickly.
Yeah. No, and I understand that. And when we need to work through what a permanent fix looks like.
Welcome back after a little ad break. I believe George, the next question, please.
Oh no, I have the next question.
Oh no,
yeah.
Yeah.
So Dylan, who would you say is your political role model or idol? And it can be multiple options.
Bob Hawke's my idol.
Good pick.
Probably a bit much to say he's my role model. A bit more of a significant guy than what I am, and he's in federal politics. But
you're still pretty significant, you know, helping out the people in Tarneit.
Yeah. But no, I love Bob. Um, uh, I love him for a whole bunch of reasons. He was serious intellect, seriously intelligent guy, really likable from a public persona point of view. Um, he was an election winning machine, similar to what Daniel Andrews was, I guess, but it's always harder to win federal elections for the Labor Party than it is to win Victorian ones, and that's not taking anything away from what Dan was able to do. But just that government and the reforms that it made were so significant, and I think that government really shaped what Australia is today. It opened up our economy. Now, some people, particularly my comrades in the union movement at the AMWU, would say that's a bad thing, and I can see their point. But I think from an economic standpoint, those reforms were significant and really opened up Australia to the rest of the world, and allowed our exporters to really flourish, I guess. The introduction of Medicare is probably one of the more significant reforms I think that we've ever seen. I spoke about what shaped my values and some of the people that I grew up with, and how important a system like Medicare is to them. That come through that government, superannuation, people being able to retire, all things going well, people being able to, or having the opportunity to retire with dignity, rather than just solely relying on the age pension, which as we know isn't significant. Floating the Australian dollar, although I think Keating will probably take most credit for that, but floating the Australian dollar also another really significant reform. I think that is the most reformist government that we've seen. I think if Whitlam had a little bit longer, he might have challenged them in terms of that, but he didn't get a long time. So an incredibly reformist government. He was an incredibly likable person, incredibly smart, intelligent. I think the best Prime Minister Australia's ever had. So he is most certainly my political idol, and has been for some time. Yeah.
And also, as you said before, that was pretty interesting that you picked Bob Hawke, especially from your specific union that you're from, because Bob Hawke during that time did push a lot for globalization and manufacturing within China, and the AMWU is a manufacturing union which focuses a lot on car building and that sort of thing back in the past. So that's very interesting.
Yep.
But I do think, but Bob Hawke was a very decent prime minister, especially during that time. When you look around, around US and the UK, you had Margaret Thatcher, you had Ronald Reagan, and Bob Hawke during that time. Around the world, it was more the whole world was moving towards conservatism and that sort of thing. And
Yep.
Bob Hawke, was a champion of his time, I guess, being the only real, I guess, left-wing sort of political figure in the English-speaking world, in a sense.
Yeah, and I think he somewhat changed. Like if you look at Australian politicians and Australian political life prior to Bob, it's quite rigid, wasn't it? Like it was still that sort of, it was quite boring.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of personality involved in it. Like that 1983 election, that's the first time that we've seen a presidential style campaign in Australia. Like we just ran around Bob, because he was just so obscenely popular, and he'd been in the public eye for so long as the president of the ACTU, and he was so popular in that role. In an environment where I think we still had somewhere in the vicinity of 50% union density in Australia. 50% of people were union members, perhaps more. So he was such an asset to the Labor Party in terms of his popularity, but he was such an asset to the country just in terms of his capacity to develop policy, and he did a fantastic job of it. I'm not somebody that is full on pro all trade. I think what happened to our car industry in particular, was really unfortunate, and once you opened up to globalization, it was going to be difficult for that industry to continue in the capacity, or at least as it did. I think there was an opportunity to save a fair portion of it. The federal Liberal government at the time destroyed that. There was an offer on the table for some extra support for that industry, which the Liberal Party refused. But when you look back on the car industry, every dollar you spent in terms of subsidies, you got such a significant amount back in GDP and economic activity. So that one was a real shame. Yeah.
Yeah. We'll now move on to our next question. George.
What made you run in the 2022 state election for Labour Party, and what made you join the Labour Party?
Yep.
I think you've touched on the last bit a little bit.
Yeah. Look, if you didn't, if you didn't vote Labor in my house, then you probably got kicked out of home, to be honest. And so there wasn't much of a choice, but my values line up with the Labor Party, obviously. But there was, you're pretty much out of the family, I think, if you dare vote Liberal. What made me run?
No more pocket money or anything like that.
No, like, and my pa was stauncher than my. Well, no, my dad's pretty staunch Labor, but my pa was more. He was a depression child and a really working class sort of guy. So
he was more like he was a Scullin sort of Labour person back in the day.
Yeah, it was join your union, vote Labor, never cross the picket line sort of stuff. What made me run in the 2022 election? The 2022 election, I think, when we look back at it historically in a period of time, I think it will be seen as a time in the Labor Party's sort of Victorian political history. It will be seen as a time of pretty significant change and pretty significant regeneration. I think there's 20 new Labor members of caucus. Now, to put that in perspective, the Liberal Party have 19 members of parliament. So we have more new members than the Liberal Party have members. There was
I think the Liberals had. Is this in just the lower house or the upper house?
Just the lower house.
Yeah, if it was upper house, it'd be 28 or something like that.
Just the lower house.
But 19 in the lower house, yeah.
Yeah, and then I think they've got 8 or 9 nationals that they form the coalition with. And so essentially what happened was, because of the growth in the West, there was a redistribution and there was a new seat, a vacant, which was obviously vacant because it's new. And then there was the retirement of Jill Hennessy as well. So there were 2 vacancies.
Our former local member.
Correct. So there were 2 vacancies. Sarah Connolly decided she was going to move. Her electorate got split in 2, basically, in the redistribution. Decided she was going to move to the new seat of Laverton. And so then Jill retired. There were 2 vacancies, Point Cook, Tarneit. Like I said, there was no local pre-selections. We spoke through internally as to who good candidates would be. Given my history working in the area, it was put to me that I would be a good candidate, and I was asked if I was interested. So I spoke about it for a little bit. Spoke to my kids about it, funnily enough, who were pretty young and didn't quite get it, but thought it was pretty cool. Took sort of 48 hours or so and decided that I'd put my hand up. I wasn't sure if there was other people interested at the time. The union were really supportive of it. Other left unions were really supportive of it as well. So I decided to throw my hat in the ring, and that's sort of where it ended up. Like I said, I was, I feel a pretty deep connection to the area, given the work that I've done in it. Hoppers Crossing is a really similar place to where I grew up. It reminds me of where I grew up a lot. And the community of Tarneit, once I started campaigning, the different faith communities in Tarneit, the multicultural communities in Tarneit, have been absolutely amazing to me, incredibly warm, welcoming. We'll do absolutely anything to help you. They've been amazing. So you know, I can't be more grateful for where my political journey has taken me and where I am now. I just absolutely love it.
Yeah. And as you said there, Harbours Crossing is a very similar a very similar area to, as you said, your area around Geelong where you grew up, because Harbours Crossing it's a pretty established area, as you said, and it's pretty working class. So it's good that you have
Yeah,
that sort of connection to your electorate.
yeah, I grew up around a place called Thompson, which is in
Oh, okay.
Geelong, and yeah, it's very, very similar to Hoppers Crossing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. We'll now move on to our final question. Tobias.
Yes. What's one piece of advice you'd give to students in 2020 this year, especially those who are entering university or high school?
So sorry, did you say what advice would I give students?
Yeah, the students
Yeah.
entering 2024.
Entering high school or finishing high school?
And entering or entering high school or university.
Yeah. Geez, I don't know what advice I'd give kids entering high school. It was a long time
You've got a lot
ago
of
for me.
experience, Dylan, so hopefully you
What's
can
that,
give some
sorry?
good advice. You've got some good experience, especially with your journey in university, so hopefully you can give
Yeah.
some good advice.
Yeah. So for kids making the transition from primary school to high school, I'm sort of racking my brain to try and think of when I did that. It was 2002. So even though I said that I'm one of the younger members of parliament, that's still a fair while ago. It makes me feel pretty old, actually. um,
I mean, I don't want to make you feel any more older, but all three of us weren't born when you
yeah,
transitioned from.
I was just about to say that you probably weren't
That
born,
was
were you?
that was when my brother was born. That's like
There you go. So what's that? 22? Yeah, 22 years ago. Wow, that makes me that makes me feel really old. Um, um, I mean, look, I guess any transition's hard, isn't it? Um, sometimes you're lucky enough, and I wasn't. I actually went from primary school to high school, and just didn't have many kids from my primary school go to the same high school that I initially went to, which was a little bit daunting for me. I was lucky enough to have some kids there that I'd played a fair bit of footy against, so sort of had some sort of similar faces. I guess the only advice that the advice that I'll give is that the transitions are hard, and if you're finding that transition hard or a little bit hard initially, it will get easier, but also make sure that if you're finding that transition hard, speak to people, people that you trust, whether that be your parents, whether that be your siblings, if they've done that transition recently, or whether it be a trusted teacher or whatever at school. If you are finding it difficult. Look, the other thing that I would say to all high school students, and high school, it goes for a long time, right? And not many students are going to be absolutely dialed in for all. What is it? 7 years or 6 years of high school? 6 years. Yeah,
6 years.
it's a long time, right? Like it's a long time to be dialed in, getting A's, and you will lose motivation, and you will get distracted, and you'll have other priorities at times. Um, um, but high school is, and you will look back on it for the most part. And I know for some kids probably this isn't the case because there's things like bullying, etc. But I think for the most part, a lot of us look back on our high school years really fondly. I certainly do. And there's a lot of experience. There's a lot of experiences and a lot of really cool things that you can do and have the opportunity to do at high school. Depending on what school you're going to, some more than others. So make sure that you make use of that and experience all of those things. Because once high school's done, I can guarantee you will wish you will wish that you can be back there again, hanging out with your mates. In terms of making the transition to university, I said this to a group of Year 12s, and I don't think their parents would have appreciated it, but it is what it is. Don't underestimate how how useful and how good a gap year can be. And whether that's straight after high school before university, or whether that's after your first year of university, you feel a bit gassed, you feel a bit burnt out. Like 6 years of high school, especially for some students, and like I said at the very beginning of this certainly wasn't me. I should have taken high school a lot more seriously than what I did. But for some students, they are dialed in from the first day of year 7 until they finish their last exam, because they know what they want to be. They want to be a doctor, they want to be a lawyer, they want to be, whatever, and they work their ass off and they get a really good score. And then by the end of it, they're cooked, as you would be, like you just would be. So if you find yourself in that position, don't be afraid to take a gap year. Like, go and earn some money. Like, go and work for 6 months and then go travel for 6 months. Have a break, recharge, re-energize, because university is difficult as well. And a lot of the time you have to work whilst you're at university, and you have to study, and you have to do exams, and you have to do work experience. You have to do all these different things. Sometimes, my university degree was 3 years. Some people are there for 4 or 5 or 6. So don't underestimate how important a gap year can be, how important recharging your batteries can be, but also how important, experiencing things outside of an educational institution can be. Like, not many people get to travel overseas whilst they're in high school. I mean, I'm in a multicultural electorate, so a lot of families go home, sure. But a gap year where you work for this first 6 months and earn some money and then go and see some of the world, I think is and experience some of the world and gain some life experience, I think is fundamentally a good thing.
Yeah, and I think gap years aren't really talked about as much in a positive light. People always say it's a waste of time, it's a waste of a year, but I think, as you said, it's a really important, really important time, especially if you are burnt out from high school. Just taking a year off and relaxing and getting yourself ready for the next journey in your life is so important, and I think it's not talked about as much in a positive light.
I had 5 or 6 gap years. Like, I didn't go back to university until 2023. And I gained so much life experience throughout that time. And as I said, when I decided I was ready to go to university, I did far better than what I would have. I graduated high school at 17. No way I would have got distinctions at 18. I just would have got bored and just quit. You're ready when you're ready. And I know there's some parents that, their child has to, graduate and have an ATAR of 90 something, and they have to go do medicine at Monash, and they have to do it right now. Yeah, I just fundamentally think that's a pretty narrow view to look at life.
Yeah, and there's so many pathways and opportunities, as we've talked about, Tobias and George and myself throughout this whole podcast. So that's the main reason why I've done the podcast, actually, just to talk to people like you, Dylan, and understand that you don't have to come from a distinguished background where you did medicine at Monash, where you did a commerce degree at Melbourne, where you did engineering, whether you got a 99 ATAR. You don't have to do those sort of things to enter Parliament and be successful in life.
No, well, lucky, because I wouldn't be.
We wouldn't be talking to you right now, Dylan, if that was the case, which would be such a shame. So I believe those are all our questions for you, Dylan. We do appreciate me, Tobias and George, you coming on to the podcast and speaking to us for the last probably hour or so. We do realize you are pretty busy, especially with the kids being off on holidays, so you must be pretty caught up with stuff. But we do appreciate you coming on and discussing your journey into politics with us.
No dramas, guys. Have to do it.